Okay, last time we went over dado joints. All right, now we're going over rabbets. Very similar joint, cut very similar as well. The dado joint, to reiterate, dado or groove was a rectangular recess cut across the grain is a dado. A rectangular recess cut on the edge or on the surface is a groove, okay? So, a rabbet is very similar to a dado. I've actually got a dado drawn right here, a two-dimensional dado. However, it does not have this locking mechanism out here on the end. Okay, it is just an open joint. It's a rectangular recess cut on the end or edge of the board. So because it's been removed, it does not have that C-channel look or it's missing one side. Okay, so standard stock thickness, once again, that's 3/4 of an inch stock thickness. If we're working with that and you're making a full rabbet where it's going to cover and completely cover the end of the board, I'll reference this with an actual piece of stock here in a minute. It's going to extend all the way over. Once again, we're going halfway through the stock, which our stock was 3/4, so half of that is 3/8. As you can see here, the overall stock thickness is 3/4, so the shoulder on the rabbet is cut back 3/4 to accommodate that board coming in. Okay, so that's a full rabbet cut in that situation. Once again, this is a combination of two joints. So here's my rabbet, and here's a rabbet dado. This is very common for box construction or in some drawer construction. So the measurements that would exist in here all are based around the 3/4 inch standard stock thickness, which makes it be almost every measurement is 3/8 because that's half of 3/4. So if we're looking at this here, overall stock thickness is 3/4. How far up the rabbet is cut is 3/8. The shoulder coming over here is 3/8 as well. So if you're looking at here, overall thickness 3/4, 3/8, and then 3/8 again there. Once again, it's coming up into the stock half the thickness, which is 3/8. Once again, a rabbet can be cut on the end or the edge of the board. Rabbets are cut all the time in the back of picture frames, shadow boxes, anything like that, where you're inserting something in, it's sitting on a lip in the stock, or the project is holding something in place and giving it a shelf to sit on. So there's the rabbet. Once again, if it's cut on the end of the board, most commonly it's used either in cabinet construction. When the side comes up, it would actually be reversed, and this would be the side and not the top, so you do not see end grain. But it is either the side of your cabinet in cabinet construction, or once again, it could be used in a rabbet dado construction for drawers or boxes. Very strong joint when utilizing the rabbet dado. Has locking mechanisms in there, multiple different contacts area, where we know that contact area creates the strength of the joint because we're able to apply more glue in those areas. The glue in the contact area is what creates the strength of the joint. So again, this is a strong joint as well. Full rabbet, creating extra contact area. A lot of times a full rabbet will be reinforced in some fashion through the rabbet, either with like a brad nail or a screw coming down through the top of the rabbet. Once again, this joint could still be pushed out. There is nothing keeping it from moving out this way. It is not part of a dado, so sometimes or often it is reinforced with some type of fastener down through the top. Okay, so that's the basics of the rabbet. Now we're gonna go cut some of these on different machines. All right, so the first rabbet we're going to cut is going to be utilizing a handheld fixed base router with a rabbet bit inside the router. So what we're going to do, and I've made some measurements here on the board already. You can see here, the shaded area is what we're going to remove to create that rabbet. A rabbet bit in the router. You're going to be removing 3/8 of an inch down and 3/8 of an inch over. Okay, so that we're doing that with the router. It's predetermined. It's very hard to mess this up. what you're going to control is the depth down into the board. So I measured 3/8 down. The bit is going to control this distance back. How that works, if we're looking at this router here, once again, the board's going to slide in. As it starts to remove this material, the edge of the board here is going to bottom out on this bearing, this edge forming bit, and it will not allow it to proceed any further in once it hits that bearing. Okay, so we're going to do this with the handheld router with an edge forming bit, which is actually a Rabbet bit. So we're going to cut this on the edge and the end of the board. We want to make sure we're clamping down our stock. Just make sure your clamp is far enough away from the end of the board that you're not interfering with the sub base on the router. So what I've done here is I've came in and I've measured and set that router 3/8 of an inch up so that this cutting edge is 3/8 of an inch off the sub base. If you are routering with an edge forming bit and you're doing both edge and end grain, you always do the end grain first because you're expecting chip out over here. If I was just doing the end grain and that is it, I would want some type of board over here to reinforce this to keep from getting chip out. Since this is a demonstration and I'm going to go back and rabbet this edge, I'm not putting a reinforcement board there. Once again, we would attach another board here, flush with the end so that it would not chip out. Once again, when we're using a fixed base or any router, we're going to make sure the bit is not in contact with the board when we pull the trigger, waiting for it to reach maximum speed and then making the cut. I'm going to do a 2-pass process, a scoring pass and then a cleaning pass. I'm going to go with the pull of the router for my scoring pass and then back against the pull of the router against the grain of the router for my cleaning pass. You can see when I set the router down, I set it down on its side. We do not want that coming in contact with the table if it's still spinning, okay? As you can see now, I have a rectangular recess cut across the end. That rabbet cut out where my lines existed on my board. So now I have a 3/8 by 3/8 shoulder within there, okay? I'm going to cut the exact same cut down along the edge. Scoring and cleaning pass. That should give you an idea of what the rabbet on the edge looks like. So since this is just a demonstration, I'm not using it. Obviously, I'd reposition my clamps and rabbet the rest of it. But there you can see I have a rabbet on the end of the board and on the edge of the board. Both of those are considered rabbets. Okay, that is with the handheld fixed base router with the rabbet bit inside the router. Once again, that's an edge forming bit. All right, now we've moved over to the table saw with a dado blade in it, okay? So we're gonna cut a full rabbet on this, so it's going to remove 3/4 of an inch at one time. You can do this exact same process on a standard table saw with a standard blade in it. Once again, this is a wobble dado blade, so it's gonna be wobbling back and forth. You could do the exact same process on the standard table saw with a standard table saw blade in it with the 1/8 inch curve, but you would take multiple passes. Okay, once again, obviously this is going to expedite the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure to the middle of our board. We're going to set our blade height to that thickness, which would be 3/8 of an inch up. into our stock, and we're going to set the blade height at 3/8 of an inch up to that line. Okay? After doing that, we're going to set a stop block here. Since we're going all the way to the edge or the end of the board, we do not want to use the fence because the fence would actually be rubbing up against the blade, so I'm using this as an additional stop block. So if I'm cutting multiple, I can push it up against this stop block and then make my cut and ensure that I'm cutting that full rabbet out. Should be pretty close. Alright, so once again I'm cutting a full rabbet here where it'll extend all the way across the end of my board. Using this as a stop block. See here, rabbet cut all the way across the end. If I take it here and now put it up here on the board, it's going to completely cover the end of that board, creating that joint that I had drawn on the board initially. Once again, if we're going to do this, a lot of times it would be in a cabinet, with this being the vertical board, so you do not see the end grain of this. Occasionally it will be reinforced with a nail or a screw. But in this fashion, it's all surface grain, which is what we desire to see in our projects. Where here we do still see some end grain, so it generally would not be expressed in this fashion if it was used in cabinet construction for a project. All right, so that's a full rabbet all the way across. On the dado blade, this has a wobble dado blade. Once again, you could use a stacked dado blade as well. We're back here at the radial arm saw. What I'm going to do is show you how to make a rabbet dado. So I'm going to use the rabbet that I've already created with the router, with the rabbet bit in there, the fixed base router. I'm going to use that to create a dado and create a locking rabbet dado, and then I'll also cut a rabbet on here as well to show you how to do that, which we should already know how to do that because you've seen me do it when I cut a dado, which are very similar processes. So in doing this and using this rabbet to create my dado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to place, this rabbet's going to be sitting down inside the board just like this. Okay, so we got to remove the material for the tongue for that rabbet to insert into there, which we're going to do so with the dado. So to create the shoulder, I'm just going to rotate the board around in this direction and transfer that line right there. So that's how far off the edge I need to be. Then I should be able to just take and transfer the thickness of my stock which that is the dado that I should need to remove, okay? How far back in here it goes is 3/8, right? So how I can mark my depth is I can set that on the edge of the board. And so to permit better viewing, I'm going to rotate it around this way. So now I'm going to bring my blade out, at least the radius of the blade. So I'm at the bottom dead center. I'm going to raise this blade up so that it's barely touching that line. Okay, so I have the depth of my dado set. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and line it up with this edge. Now I'm making one dado here. If I'm making multiple ones, when I make this first pass, I'm going to have a stop block set up so that every single one is cut the same. And then when I make this last cut, I'm gonna make sure I have a stop block set so everyone is made the same. So I'd have a stop block set when making this cut and this cut. Once again, I'm doing multiple passes on the radial arm saw here. This is sufficient when making like one project. If I'm making multiple rabbet dados, I might want to cut this dado right here with a router bit on the table router, which we'll do here momentarily. Okay? So I'm going to make multiple passes cleaning out the interior of this. Once I start to get close to my back line, I'm going to start checking it to make sure I keep my joint nice and tight. As you can see here, I stopped before I got to my line so I can check to make sure that I did not take out too much. As you can see, I still need to remove just a small amount to get that rabbet to fit in there. Again, I'm going to be checking this often for this last pass because I want it to be snug, and then I will place a stop block on that last cut. So there we have it, rabbet dado. Rabbet goes all the way in. Oh, you can't see there. We have a rabbet dado. Rabbet goes all the way in. The bottom's out at the dado. I'm flush on the outside edge. If I wanted to cut a rabbet on the radial arm saw, I would do the exact same process. So I'm just going to turn this into a full rabbet. So I've now turned this into a full rabbet where it's lapping over the edge or the end of the board, creating a rabbet joint. All right. Once again, I had to do multiple passes to do that. Obviously, the dado blade on the table saw was much more quicker and efficient. But once again, sometimes if you're not making very many projects or based on tool availability, this might be a better option based on what you have or even a little quicker. All right, lastly here, we're gonna cut a rabbet on the table router. We have a straight groove bit located in here. Because we're using a router, the maximum depth we can take out at one pass is 1/4 of an inch. So we're gonna have to do this in two processes. So since I'm cutting a rabbet on the end and the edge, I'm gonna make both those cuts first, and then I'll come back and increase the height of the router bit to cut to the depth that I need. Once again, we do not want to try to take this out in one pass. It'll increase the load on the collet and could pull the bit up out of the collet if we're trying to remove too much material at one time. Once again, maximum material removed when using a router is 1/4 inch depth per pass. Halfway through my depth, I'm going to go ahead and cut the edge. So now that I've made my first pass, cutting the rabbet on the edge and the end of the board, now I'm going to raise the bit up the remainder of the way to cut to the desired depth of 3/8. As you can see on my second pass, I cleaned it out. Now I'm at the full distance over. And I have it also cut on the edge of the board as well. Okay? So, that is a rabbet cut with a straight groove on the router table. Things to remember about the rabbet when making a full rabbet. Once again, this is 3/8 of an inch deep into the stock and 3/4 across, so it's coming all the way across the board. Okay? If you're making a rabbet dado, you're making a smaller rabbet, 3/8, 3/8, 3/8 across, 3/8 down, 3/8 shoulder for the rabbet, and that will mate with the dado.